Account takeovers, malicious campaigns, impersonation, and data breaches are on the rise, driven by the pandemic and security challenges of a remote workforce. The number one most common attack vector in breaches is compromised credentials. Constella Intelligence protects your key employees from digital risk by continuously monitoring the deep, dark, and surface web for exposed credentials, detecting threats that others miss with real-time alerts to protect you and your company from a targeted attack. Try it free at securityweekly.com/Constella. Let's face it, cyber attackers have the advantage. Extra Hop is on a mission to help you take it back. Regain the upper hand with security that can't be undermined, outsmarted, or compromised. When you don't have to choose between protecting your business and moving it forward, that's security uncompromised. See how it works in the full product demo, free online at securityweekly.com/Extra Hop. Cyber risk and compliance automation is finally here. Legacy GRC systems cannot support the powerful, real-time automation and oversight that organizations require to take risks that matter to succeed. CyberSync continuous control automation ingests data from the IT GRC stack to update controls against regulatory requirements and risks in real time, delivering insights and visibility. See how members of the Fortune 500 are saving millions annually by visiting securityweekly.com/CyberSync.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Jason Albuquerque and Lee Neely. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can now also join our mailing list, Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms. CRA's Business Intelligence Unit has launched its next survey on Zero Trust. What are your barriers to Zero Trust implementation? We're actually going to cover an article on this in this segment. Take our survey and enter to win a $500 Tango gift card by visiting securityweekly.com/Zero Trust. Report results will be released at our upcoming Zero Trust eSummit in March. All right, gentlemen, to the articles. We do have one on Zero Trust, which is why I wanted Lee here. But before we get there, Audit Committee, increasingly focused on cybersecurity. Really? Wow.
Get used to it, people. Every committee needs a cybersecurity expert at this point. I mean, come on. You know, it's one of those scenarios where it's probably definitely one of the largest business risks out there in an organization today. So expect your board of directors to start having cybersecurity experts, your audit committees, any business-related committee that you're going to spin up, you should have a cybersecurity expert on it.
Go ahead, Lee. No.
I would say I have a similar but slightly twisted take on it, because I had a meeting this morning with my CISO, and he was looking at something very similar, and he says, we're going to need more cyber analysts who are sitting there looking at the regulatory requirements and what we're doing and helping us find, test, and close the gaps. But they're looking at it from what are the auditors coming at us from, as opposed to coming at it from best security practices. We need both. But I thought that was a little slightly different than what Jason's saying. But yeah, we need more cyber brains at the table. That's a given. And people willing to roll up their sleeves.
And that's where I was starting to go, Lee, because I remember back in the early days of Graham Leach Bliley in the regulatory side and the shift by the IT auditors to start to look at security, right? Here we are 20 years later almost, and we're having the same conversation at the audit committee. And I guess my question is, do organizations, do these audit committees have the security expertise to actually know what they should be looking for? Because it's not just about the regulatory aspects, which you bring up, Lee, which are important, but that's not the only risk associated with cybersecurity in the space. And are people thinking holistically about the business risk aspects of security, or do we still have some big gaps?
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, they're not looking at it today. I think that's why the need is there, right? So to have an executive level cybersecurity expert on your audit committee is going to give a perspective that hasn't been there, right? We're going to be looking at supply chain risk. We're going to be looking at internal risk, right? That threat vector from the inside. We're going to be looking at all of these different aspects to business risk and business resilience overall. that's never been on these audit committees before because they've been financially focused. So
Right.
I think it's essential that we take part in these conversations.
Yeah, we just had a segment on digital risk. What's the risk to the executive? What's the risk coming from the employee side? Like,
100%.
Is the audit committee even thinking about
Physical
this?
security. I mean, think about it. We were talking physical security as well. Are our locations safe that are around the world? Is there any type of uprest around the world that we have to be thinking of it? From a financial perspective. Yeah, we need that level of perspective on these audit committees to bring those conversations to the table.
Yeah. I mean, we're seeing it we're starting to see the cybersecurity expertise come into the board. My guess is you're going to see that same trend continue down to the audit committees that are reporting to the board, so that there are relevant security risks included in those audits as they roll up. I guess that's good for us old curmudgeons that have been in the industry for a while. As we're looking for a retirement job, we'll just go sit on a bunch of audit board committees.
Bunch of boards, right? Seriously. I mean, at the end of the day, if there's a trickle-down effect, if it starts at the board of directors, and now the board of directors are putting some pressure down on their advisory committees, yeah, no, absolutely. I want that, right? So start putting those cybersecurity experts at the board level. That way they can start looking at all of these different committees that they have, advisory committees, audit committees, and say, well, where's your cyber expertise, right? And start asking the right questions and putting pressure downstream. Need it.
Yep. Yeah, agreed.
Keep their feet to the fire.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Now, the law of unintended consequences always happens, right? Because now there's going to be more and more mandates from the board, more and more mandates from the C-level executives. Do we have the IT talent to actually be in place to remediate those? That's a whole other conversation.
Perfect segue into the next article, because we're going to talk mandates and keeping feet to the fire. OMB issues their zero trust strategy. Lee, we talked about this when I don't know, a couple months back when you came on. We were talking about zero trust and what are going to be some of the challenges. So OMB comes out and sets a timeline. Within 30 days from the publication, by January 26th, you need to designate and identify a zero trust strategy implementation leader. Okay, that's pretty easy. You name a body. Within 60 days, or March 26th, agencies must build on the mandated plans by incorporating the additional requirements spelled out. Okay, so you got to have your plan and then have it fully implemented by the end of 2024. Like, really? Right. Like, are there funds available for the agencies to actually execute on this timeline?
Yeah, unfunded mandates.
I haven't seen
the beauty of the government.
So the original executive order, 14028, which just jumps on, implied there would be funding for the initiatives in. To date, or at least we're 6-8 months out now, there's been zero funding identified and released. But the timelines haven't changed, the requirements haven't changed. And, I mean, I get it, the old moat and drawbridge model doesn't work with today's adversaries, but if you want to switch the entire federal government in 2.5 fiscal years to zero trust, that's a pretty tall order. I don't think it's going to happen by the end of 24. But I'd like to see us make progress, but I just don't think, particularly without funding, lots of funding.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, with that unrealistic timeline, that means nothing's going to be done to quality, because they're just going to be rushing to put checks in a box, which I definitely don't appreciate as a security leader, right?
No.
Typically when you make goals, you want them to be achievable, right? So why don't we sit back and make some achievable goals here? Now, the one thing I will say as I'm impressed is that they actually used CISA's model and didn't create their own, right? Because, part of what we see in the government is every department wants to create their own model. So I'm glad there's not an OMB zero trust model that they have to follow too and create more silos.
There was actually a couple of good things slipped into that memo as well. One was that on our national security systems, they need to follow the 863-3, the get away from password complexity, use long passphrases and make sure you don't have things in a breach. But on a classified system, that's a little harder. But basically, moving up the password guidance to today's requirements was good. Also, in preparation for zero trust, they had previously issued a directive that all external-facing websites had to use HSTS and HTTPS for their transactions. They've now added everything on the inside of your firewall. And realistically, if you're going to zero trust, you can't have the network DMARC anymore. You can't trust the firewall. Except for I still believe there's some specific use cases like OT that's going to have a firewall. But
so pretty much full end-to-end encryption, right?
Yes. They want encryption. They wanted all systems encrypted in transit and at rest across the federal government by November 2021. And they actually also had encryption in use originally in there as well. Meaning you have, an encrypted column in a database, for example, protect information. It's only decrypted when used. I think that deadline went flying by. So, but it's a good idea to do these things. I'm not saying these shouldn't be done. I'm just saying I don't know how to do it at the speed of government.
Right. Especially when it's not funded.
Right. I mean, we've been doing funding. I mean, you can do laptops with encryption. We've been doing that for a few years now, but a lot of desktops don't even have a TPM chip, so it becomes more interesting.
Yeah. What I love about the architecture is it just validates my app user data discussion. Because I said these were the three criticals. Now you add devices and network to it, and you have the zero trust model. But it does give you a pretty good idea of where to make investments. I think as a CISO and as an organization, these are things that are important. However, I'm not sure the government can move that fast when they don't have the money to do it. And these are complex systems across these five core domains. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, Lee just presented a great point. Technical debt, right? Can they afford to get rid of the technical debt that they have in place by that timeline? Most likely not. Right. Yep. So you're going to have to create some level of a roadmap to be able to address the technical debt that's there. You may have legacy systems, applications, devices, right? So you have to take that into account.
Yep. By the way, the executive order also applies to national security systems as well. There was a memo last week that also changed that scope. Originally, it was only for unclassified. I'm not sure about the accelerated cloud adoption for national security systems. That probably translates to common services as opposed to connecting them to the internet. But there's good architecture out here, and NIST is working on like 19 different models for implementations for agencies to leverage to get to zero trust. So it's not a greenfield as much, but I still think time is going to be the challenge.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Yeah, always. Wait, what is it? Time, speed, quality. Right. What? Pick two. You can't have all
two,
three.
But not three.
That's right.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely.
CIOs are seeing prioritized security because CEOs are trying to reduce risk. Now, what's interesting about this article is very focused on the CIO. I made a case at the end of last year that the CIO should report to the CISO. So isn't this just ultimately the CISO's responsibility?
Yep. That's exactly where I was going to go with this, Matt. I mean, you read my mind. We've had these conversations, long enough to know that, we're in a position now where I truly believe the CISO should be pulling those puppet strings there, honestly. Right. So, I don't know. I had some issues with this article. I don't think it empowered the CISO enough. I think they talked too much about the CIO and the CTO being in control. It's a scenario where I'm the evangelist for the CISO. So this is where the CISO should have a seat at the table and have the ability to influence across the board.
Right. Yeah. Agreed.
Without risk of influence, right? Influence from a CTO who has an agenda, influence from a CIO who has an agenda. And the agenda for those folks aren't always security. It's not always security.
Yeah, that's true. That was always the kind of the intrinsic challenge with the CISO reporting to the CIO, because the CIOs, they were all about availability. They didn't care about the rest necessarily.
Right.
So
yeah.
You have to have a couple work.
Right. Yeah. 2 new banking requirements coming into play. I thought these were interesting, right? The first one is banking organizations must notify their primary federal regulator of any computer security incidents that rises within 36 hours. So, that's pretty fast turnaround for security incident, which means your SIM and your SOARs are going to be busy, pulling all this data together and tracking things. The second one is a bank service provider must notify each affected banking organization as soon as possible when provider determines it's experienced a computer security incident. Now, I think this is really interesting because having worked on the third-party side for a bank, knowing the number of service providers that support some of these banking organizations, holy cow, that's a huge amount of work because anytime something happens to their systems, think about all the notifications in the downstream banks that have to be notified of breaches.
I know. And I mean, from the article, it basically says that at the time the organization determines that there's a notification incident, the ticker starts.
Yeah.
Right. So the second you have that epiphany of, oh my God, I think we may have to start notification, timer's on. Holy crap. 36
So
hours from there, baby.
I'm used to that kind of language coming from the .gov space. We do have, once it's determined that you actually have an instance, the clock starts coming down, and you got to look at your federal and state requirements for reporting because you might have to report to both. I'm glad that they've, tried to define these things a little bit and they're not so vague. But I'm also looking at this going, hey, we put language in our contract with our cloud providers. If they have an incident, they better freaking tell us. I would think that wouldn't be that foreign in the banking industry, but your comment, Matt, leads me to believe that might be.
Yeah, I mean, think about a lot of these contracts that you have with your third-party service providers. They may or may not have some of those clauses in there. This is something now that has to be managed much more holistically across the organization. And if you see it here in banking, the question is, when does it come to healthcare and some of the other industries over time? This is kind of the early warning signal for some of those other industries potentially too.
I would say if you're in the cyber business, you ought to be talking to your supply chain management folks about standard cyber provisions to go into your contracts, and then look at, get those figured out, and then start looking at modding contracts that need to have them. Do it now. I mean, I've been on groups that do that. It actually, my supply chain people said, "What do you mean it's hard to mod the contract? I can do whatever we need to. Don't worry about it. Let's get it right." That was a good answer.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't happen that fast, trust me.
I know, it takes time, but willingness to work it makes it go faster.
Yeah. We have some cyber insurance news this week. We've been talking about some of the challenges with people getting cyber insurance going forward. There's been so many claims. This is an interesting interpretation of a lawsuit against a cyber insurance claim that was initially declined by the insurer that was then overturned in the appeals court. And the reason I brought this in is if you get cyber insurance and you're expecting certain things to be covered, and then they come back and say, well, no, that's not part of the coverage. One of two things is wrong. Either it's not clear in the policy or you're just outright trying to deny the claim. So this litigation gets interesting because it actually overturns the insurer's decline of the actual component because of some terminology in the way it was structured in the cyber insurance policy. So even if cyber insurance is a challenge for organizations to get, what I hope we get is more clear policies going forward about what is and what is not covered.
Yeah, right. And you know, as I started reading the article and I saw when it hit district court and they actually sided with the insurance company, I had that oh shit moment, right? But then getting down into the article more, once they went to the federal court of appeals and it got reversed, that made me a little bit more happy about what was going on. But it just shows you that you have to go through the process because ultimately if they settled at district court, what was it, like $200,000 or something like that? They would have been in the hole somewhere around there.
Yeah. And plus their policy and all the other stuff, right? I mean, if you're paying for something and then it doesn't get paid, I mean, yes, you have to fight this in a legal battle. You know, at the end of the article, it says, worst case scenario is you don't get something covered that you pay for. The second worst case, the second worst case scenario is you have to go to court to actually get it paid for and pay all the legal fees to get payment.
Right. And honestly, the use case that was here, I don't think either of you or anybody listening to this would ever think it wouldn't be covered by cyber liability insurance. I mean, think about it. An email comes into an employee. It's literally social engineering the employee. They get off the phone. They do a wire transfer. It's fraudulent, but the insurance company didn't want to cover it.
Yeah,
That's something innately I would think would be covered, right?
I mean, yeah, this isn't like, you called us for cyber fraud when this should have been covered by your building coverage or something. This is like,
Mm-hmm.
no, that's not even any way connected. I've talked to somebody who they had they had the wrong insurer they contact for what they thought was the incident. When they dug down into it, it was justifiably wrong. It wasn't the type of instance that insurer covered, was the learning experience. They went to the right one. But this feels like this was right in the sweet spot of cyber coverage. And what the
Absolutely.
hell?
Right. Exactly right. Yeah. Next article on communication and leadership, the who, what, and why of communications. And, you can see the different segments. The last paragraph to me was just a little telling. Like, our teams deserve a stronger response from us as leaders. Yes. Right. So we need to spend more time considering possible roads to our solutions. Solving management dilemmas requires more than just one approach. Solving a problem is as diverse as there are people on Earth. And when we're talking hybrid, how you do that, via what channels you do that, has all shifted in the past 2 years. The number of meetings I sit on is crazy. Like, and Jason, I know you and Lee probably have the same experience. Not every channel works for everybody, and you've got to make your adjustments to keep your team engaged and continue to drive leadership. And I think it's just challenging for everybody.
And the other challenge that we're seeing too, and this is why we have to be extremely diligent as leaders and making sure we're connected and building those relationships, is, look at the newswire. We're in the middle of the Great Recession or whatever we want to call this, but I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it with our customers. I'm seeing it in organizations I used to work for. People, over the course of the pandemic, people are starting to look at their lives and they're looking at their jobs and saying, you know what? I need balance. I need way more balance. And they're making decisions that they wouldn't have necessarily made 2 years ago to strike that work-life balance. And if we're not providing that level of experience as leaders that shows them that we care about them, we want to have relationships with our employees, we want to make sure we're taking care of their work-life balance needs, they're going to bolt. They're going to be gone. And we're going to lose really, really good employees. So that's another business challenge that folks really need to look into, because it's real. It is happening.
It is. We just experienced a couple of them in the last couple days. And every organization is going to face this in some form or fashion.
100%.
Last article, how poor cybersecurity culture can lead to insider risk. It's kind of on the same thread, right? We were just talking through, right? But I love the first one. We need to shut down the Department of No.
You know what? We've talked about it a million times on this show. In order for us to have a seat at the table and be respected at that seat at the table, we have to show that we're a customer service centric organization as a security team. Number one, right? We're there to enable the business. We're there to enable the employees. We are there to help guide the organization to an outcome with a security first mindset. If we're not viewed as that, we will never have a seat at the table. We will be shunned from the seat at the table if we do. So we have to have a positive customer service centric organization always. People need to be very comfortable coming to us with a problem, even if it's a false positive. I would rather you raise your hand for something that may not necessarily be a threat than not raise your hand for something that was.
Right. We need to reward people for good behavior and stop, yelling at them for bad behavior, because we need positive reinforcement. If we continue the negative enforcement around this, we're never going to build a strong security culture. And the article talks about a little bit, like, give out a free coffee card for every time somebody reports a phishing attack or whatever. We want to reinforce the positive and get away from the negative.
Yeah, 100%.
I can't tell you how many times I've been there where the program is coming in. I said, this seemed, and I thought, and I'll say, well, wait a minute. I think we could figure out how to do this securely. Just let's pick this apart and figure out what needs to be done, what we can do to mitigate the risk. And they look at me like I'm from Mars, because they thought that I was going to say no way in hell. Well, no. If they needed to do their jobs, we got to figure it out, not say no.
You know, it's something that you sit back and you say, let's take a look at the outcome they are trying to achieve, right? That's the end game. Because, you know, we're all human, and you know, we come at things and saying, I need, right? I need this solution, I need whatever. But in many instances, just having that one sentence that says, all right, well, let's sit down and talk about the outcome you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
Getting that deep and understanding what the end result is supposed to be. You know, I've told so many leaders that I've worked with, you know what, you're trying to cruise down I-95 at 110 miles an hour. I think we need to take 295 right now, which is a little bit of side road. It's going to take you a little bit longer, right? It's going to take you a little bit to get around it and to build this out the right way, but you're going to get to that destination. You're going to get there effectively, efficiently, right? So,
Right.
so talking
You're gonna get
about
what
that
you want.
outcome and everybody agreeing on that outcome is huge.
Yeah, agreed.
And then delivering against it once you've agreed to
Right.
it. See, that's the other thing that's going to get us in a lot of trouble as leaders, and especially cybersecurity leaders, right?
Yep.
If we've identified the outcomes and we have an approach, then we better be able to deliver on that. Because I see this in business in general, right? We set an expectation of what our outcomes are. You put together a model to be able to meet that, and then you don't execute against the model.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
There's no way you're going to achieve the outcome if you're not doing the foundational work based on the
Right.
model to get to the outcome.
You got to walk the walk, right? And otherwise it tarnishes the brand. You can sit there and talky all day long, but is that what you want to be viewed as a leader, as a department
Right.
who just talks their way through a problem and never resolves the problem? No, you got to walk the walk.
You got to walk the walk. You have to perform. And performance, I think, is one of the biggest challenges these days, is building a plan and executing against that plan and showing the performance against that plan. That is what will continue to keep our leaders in the seats that they need to continue to help organizations secure themselves.
It's all about trust, right? It's all about trust.
Yep.
Yes, it is. Lee, Jason, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.